The first time I met Cheryl, she was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon and glaring at my boots like I just tracked mud through her designer kitchen. "You can't just build whatever you want out here, sir," she said, narrowing her eyes. "My name's Xander Tiller," I replied, not offering a handshake. "And that cabin's on my land." She didn't budge. "This is Pine Bluff Estates. We have standards, guidelines, aesthetic harmony." "Your cabin," she actually used air quotes, "looks like a hunting shack." "It's a log cabin," I said, calm but firm. "Built to code with permits, on private property that's been in my family since the 60s. I just finished restoring it." Cheryl puckered her lips like she'd sucked a lemon. "Well, I'm president of the HOA and we were not consulted. You'll be hearing from us." I already had. 2 weeks earlier, I got my first of what would become a mountain of violation letters. "Unapproved structure," they said. "Non-compliant materials. Exterior color not approved." The kicker. My cabin sat on a secluded 2 acres outside the main development. Technically, the HOA had no jurisdiction, but that didn't stop them from trying. I figured it was just bluster. Then I went out of town for 3 days to visit my brother in Denver. When I came back, the cabin was gone. Nothing but a flattened patch of dirt and a few broken boards remained. I stood there in disbelief for a full 10 minutes. Then I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Harlan stared at me like I'd told him aliens landed. "Wait, you're saying someone demoed your entire cabin?" "Yeah," I said, "and I've got a pretty good idea who." The next morning, I attended the HOA meeting. Cheryl sat at the head of the table in the clubhouse, sipping from a mug that said Boss Babe. Her blonde bob was perfectly sculpted, and her smile was fake enough to make plastic jealous. Well, she said when she saw me. "Look who decided to join the community. You tore down my cabin." Gasps echoed around the room. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Cheryl didn't flinch. "We removed an illegal structure." I stepped forward and dropped a folder on the table. "That illegal structure was fully permitted, stamped by the county, surveyed, zoned. You had no authority." She glanced at the papers with a disinterested shrug. "We sent warnings." "You sent harassment," I said. "You broke onto private property. You committed felony destruction." She rolled her eyes. "Let's not be dramatic." "I'm not," I said. "The sheriff will be contacting you, and the county clerk." He already did. "Because my name is on every single legal document tied to this land." Cheryl blinked. "What?" I leaned in. "I work for the county recorder's office. I process property records for a living. Every permit, every deed, every plat map for this area, I've personally signed off on them." "You picked the wrong guy." Cheryl's eyes darted to the folder again, but her voice didn't waver. "You can't expect us to keep track of every piece of land around this development. Mistakes happen." "You didn't make a mistake," I said. "You hired a demolition crew, bypassed a locked gate, and bulldozed a permitted structure without a court order. That's not a mistake. That's criminal trespass and destruction of property." The room had gone silent. Even the guy with the Bluetooth headset and the golf tan wasn't pretending to check his phone anymore. Cheryl leaned back in her chair like she was trying to sink into it. A man at the far end of the table cleared his throat. "Is it true you didn't consult the board before authorizing that demolition?" "Don't be ridiculous, Peter," Cheryl said quickly. "We discussed it in closed session." "That was about fencing violations," Peter replied. "Not this." Cheryl's jaw tightened. "I acted in the interest of the association." "You acted without a vote," another board member said, "and without verifying the property boundaries." I didn't wait for the rest of them to catch up. I turned and walked out, already dialing my attorney's number. By the next morning, Deputy Harlan was back on my driveway, this time with a plainclothes investigator from the county DA's office. I handed them the full set of documentation permits, surveys, historical plat maps, and the certified letter I'd sent to the HOA 6 months earlier stating that my land fell outside their jurisdiction. The investigator, a woman named Rachel, flipped through the documents with a practiced eye. "You weren't bluffing about working in records. This is meticulous." "I knew they were going to pull something," I said. "I just didn't think they'd go this far." Rachel nodded. "Well, they did. And if they hired that crew directly, without a court order or a legal claim to the land, it's not just trespassing. It's conspiracy." Harlan looked over. We already confirmed the contractor. Guy says Cheryl signed the work order herself. Claimed it was HOA-owned common land and that the structure was a safety hazard. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Did he check the tax parcel? He didn't even check the address, Harlan said. That afternoon, I drove down to the contractor's office. It was a squat brick building with a faded sign that read Mountain View Demo and Grading. Inside, the owner, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s named Rick, looked like he'd been waiting for me. "Look," he said before I even opened my mouth, "I'm hearing all kinds of stuff. I didn't know it was yours. I wouldn't have touched it if I'd known. Cheryl told us it was their property. You didn't verify the parcel?" She gave us a site map. Looked legit, had a Pine Bluff Estates seal and everything. I pulled out a copy of the actual survey and slapped it on his desk. "This is the real parcel line. That cabin sat 120 feet outside HOA territory. You knocked down a private residence. That's a felony." Rick rubbed his face. "I'll cooperate with the investigation. I've got the signed work order, email chain, everything." "I'll hand it over." "You're going to want to," I said, "because the DA's office is already building a case." 3 days later, Cheryl was served with a subpoena. Rachel called to let me know the grand jury was opening a file. "We're putting together charges for unlawful entry, destruction of property, and falsifying documents," she said. "We're also reviewing her position as HOA president. If we can prove she used forged materials to authorize that demolition, it opens up a whole other set of charges." Meanwhile, I filed a civil suit. My attorney, a lean, serious man named Lucien with a taste for procedural precision, filed motions for punitive damages, restitution, and injunctive relief. He also filed a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from stepping foot on my land. 2 weeks after that, Cheryl resigned. She didn't make a statement, just left a typed note taped to the clubhouse door saying she was stepping down due to personal reasons. But the truth came out anyway. Once the board saw the demolition order, complete with a forged site map and an unvoted authorization signed only by her, they panicked. Peter called me personally. "Xander, on behalf of the board, I want to say I'm not interested in apologies," I said. "I'm interested in fixing this," he hesitated. "How? You start by cooperating with the investigation, then you hold a public meeting and tell the community exactly what happened. No spin, no PR, just truth." To my surprise, they did. The clubhouse was packed the night of the meeting. Residents from every corner of Pine Bluff Estates showed up, some because they were curious, others because they were angry. Cheryl didn't show, but the rest of the board sat in a row like schoolkids awaiting discipline. Peter stood at the podium and read a prepared statement, outlining the events, admitting that Cheryl had acted unilaterally, and acknowledging that the cabin had been built entirely within legal rights and outside HOA jurisdiction. He apologized for the board's lack of oversight and pledged to support the ongoing investigation. When he finished, hands shot up across the room. "Are we going to be held liable for her actions? What happens to our dues if we get sued? Is the HOA even allowed to exist if it can't tell where its boundaries are?" I didn't say a word. I just stood in the back watching it all unravel. That night, I got a call from Lucien. The DA's office just filed formal charges: criminal mischief, trespass, forgery, and abuse of authority. They're also subpoenaing HOA financials. Why the financials? Because Cheryl used association funds to pay for the demo crew. That's misappropriation. And if she forged a vote to release the funds, that's embezzlement. I let that sink in. By the end of the month, Cheryl was indicted. Her mugshot made the local paper. The headline read, "HOA president charged in illegal demolition scheme." The contractor, Rick, was offered immunity in exchange for his cooperation. He handed over every document, every email, every invoice. Turned out Cheryl had also tried to have a neighboring property cited for unauthorized landscaping. Despite it being outside HOA limits too, her obsession with control had finally caught up with her. The board held emergency elections. 3 members stepped down, 2 others were voted out. The new president, a quiet woman named Marlene who'd spent her career as a city planner, first order of business: A full audit of HOA activity for the last 5 years. As for me, I rebuilt, not just the cabin but better, stronger foundation, reinforced beams, a wraparound porch. I didn't ask permission, I didn't need to, and this time I installed cameras. Motion-activated, night vision, cloud storage, every inch of my property covered because trust is earned, and Pine Bluff Estates had a lot of earning to do. A month after the grand jury handed down the indictment, the county courthouse was buzzing. Cheryl's arraignment drew more locals than a 4th of July parade. I didn't attend, didn't need to. My attorney Lucien was there, flanked by a paralegal and a court liaison, quietly observing from the second row while Cheryl's lawyer tried to argue for a dismissal. It was denied before he finished his second sentence, but the legal process was only part of it. The bigger storm was happening inside Pine Bluff Estates. With Cheryl's resignation and the board shake-up, the neighborhood was teetering on a line between reform and collapse. Marlene, the new president, wasted no time. She scheduled a full review of every enforcement action taken during Cheryl's tenure. That included property citations, fines, architectural rejections, and restrictions on everything from mailbox height to porch swing color. I got a knock on my door one Thursday morning, just as I was finishing up installing the final handrail on the rebuilt staircase. The woman standing on my porch wore a deep green windbreaker with the county seal stitched on the pocket and a badge clipped to her belt. "Mr. Tiller?" she asked. I nodded, wiping sawdust from my palms. "Investigator Langston, Public Integrity Bureau, mind if I ask you a few questions?" I stepped aside and motioned her in. She didn't sit. "We're looking into a possible pattern of misconduct," she said, pulling a small recorder from her bag. "We believe Cheryl may have used her position to funnel HOA funds into private accounts and retaliate against residents she considered uncooperative." I raised an eyebrow. "You think she was embezzling?" Langston nodded. "And weaponizing HOA authority." "We've already confirmed she had duplicate invoices routed through a defunct landscaping company registered under her cousin's name. The payments were masked as groundskeeping for non-existent common areas." I crossed my arms. "And nobody caught that until now. She kept the amounts under reporting thresholds and spread them across different budget lines," Langston said. "But when we pulled HOA financials for the last 4 years, the inconsistencies started lighting up like flares." "Why come to me? You're listed as the complainant in the demolition case," she said. "And we found correspondence where Cheryl referred to you as a disruptive element and threat to governance. That language shows intent." I waved toward my kitchen table. "I've got hard copies of every letter she sent me. Emails too. And photos from before and after the demo." Langston pulled out a flash drive. "Would you be willing to provide digital scans?" "We want to build a timeline." I made her a copy while she stood nearby, glancing occasionally at the framed black and white photo of my grandfather standing beside the original cabin, hammer in hand. When she left, I called Lucien. "She's not going down for just one crime," I said. "They're building a whole case." "She's in deep water," he replied, "and people are lining up to testify. We've already been contacted by 3 former board members who claim she manipulated votes and threatened residents with fines unless they backed her decisions." That afternoon, I got another visit. This time from a man named Victor Patel, a retired electrical engineer who lived near the Ridge Trail. I'd never met him before, but he looked tired and determined. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "You know, Cheryl denied my request to install solar panels for 3 years. Said they didn't fit the aesthetic." I nodded. "That sounds about right. She even threatened to fine me for unauthorized roof modifications after I mounted a satellite dish." I motioned him in. "You thinking about joining the class action?" He looked surprised. "There's a class action," Lucien's putting it together. "Anyone who suffered financial loss or property interference due to HOA overreach under Cheryl's leadership is eligible." Victor's shoulders loosened just a little. "Then I'm in. She cost me thousands. And I've got every denial letter in a file cabinet." Word spread fast. By the end of the week, Lucien's office had over 40 residents signed on. Some had been fined for using drought-resistant landscaping. One woman, a nurse, had been threatened with foreclosure over a late $85 dues payment while she was deployed on emergency relief during hurricane season. Lucien brought in a second attorney to help with the growing case. The goal wasn't just money, it was to dismantle the structure that let Cheryl operate unchecked. And with the DA's office looking at criminal conspiracy charges, we had leverage. Meanwhile, the HOA's insurance carrier was panicking. They'd been blindsided by the demolition claim and were now staring down the barrel of widespread liability. They sent a corporate risk attorney to negotiate a settlement privately. Lucien met them in a neutral office downtown. I sat in on the meeting, mostly silent, while their rep tried to lowball us with a settlement offer. "Mr. Tiller," she said, "we understand your frustration, but litigation is time-consuming, expensive, and emotionally taxing. Wouldn't it be better to resolve this quietly?" Lucien barely glanced at her. "You demolished a registered residence with no legal authority, using HOA funds under the direction of a person under criminal indictment. Quiet isn't on the table." She sighed. "What are your terms?" Lucien slid a document across the table. "Full reconstruction costs, double damages, HOA-wide policy overhaul supervised by independent counsel, and public acknowledgement of wrongdoing." She blinked. "Public, press release, signed, distributed." She hesitated. "That could affect property values." Lucien didn't blink. "So could fraud, conspiracy, and criminal demolition." 2 days later, the HOA signed the agreement. The insurance company cut a check, and the entire neighborhood got a printed statement in their mailbox acknowledging what happened. A week after that, Marlene called a town hall meeting. The clubhouse was packed again, but the atmosphere had shifted. Residents were no longer just angry, they were motivated. Committees were formed to review bylaws. Elections were scheduled for every vacant seat. And for the first time since I'd rebuilt the cabin, someone from the HOA actually stepped onto my land, this time to apologize. Marlene stood at the base of the porch, hands folded. "We've got a long way to go," she said. "But it starts with accountability." I nodded. "Then you're on the right track." The final blow came 3 weeks later. Cheryl's trial date was set, and the prosecution filed a motion to add witness tampering to the charges. Turns out she'd sent messages to 2 former board members urging them to stick to the narrative about the demolition. They turned the texts over. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The DA offered it conditional on full restitution, a public confession of wrongdoing, and a permanent lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. She took it. The confession went out in a county press release. Word got around fast. For months afterward, real estate agents in Pine Bluff had to assure prospective buyers that the HOA had been restructured and reformed. But the damage was done. The name Cheryl Maddox had become a cautionary tale. As for me, I finally got to sit on my rebuilt porch with a cup of coffee and watch the morning fog roll through the trees without checking for survey lines or surveillance drones. The cabin stood stronger than before, and the boundaries, legal and otherwise, were clear. Justice didn't come easy. But it came with receipts, court orders, and community resolve, and Cheryl. She'll be reading property boundaries a lot more closely from now on, from a much smaller house, without a clipboard. The last of the scaffolding came down the same morning I got the call from the Public Integrity Bureau. This time, it wasn't just investigator Langston on the line, it was Assistant District Attorney Melody Tran. Her voice was clipped, but focused. "We've expanded the scope of the investigation," she said. "We believe this goes beyond Cheryl Maddox." I set down the torque wrench I'd been using to tighten a railing bracket. "You found someone else involved. There's evidence of collusion between Cheryl and a former zoning compliance officer," she said. "He approved forged boundary documents that were used to justify the demolition. His name is Aaron Kellerman. Ring any bells?" It did. Vaguely. I'd seen his signature on a handful of past permits, but I hadn't dealt with him directly. Still, the idea that someone from inside the county system had been involved made my jaw tighten. "We're issuing a warrant for his arrest," Melody continued. The forged map submitted by Cheryl didn't come from her alone. It was marked with a secondary approval stamp belonging to Kellerman. He backdated it 6 months. My stomach turned. So she had helped fabricating jurisdiction. Exactly. We're building a corruption case that includes falsifying public records, fraud, and conspiracy to commit unlawful demolition. It's going to shake a few trees. That was putting it lightly. By the following week, Kellerman had been arrested. The news broke fast, and the Public Integrity Bureau held a press conference on the courthouse steps. I watched it from the kitchen window while fitting drawer handles. Melody stood straight-backed at the podium, flanked by county officials and 2 uniformed officers. "These charges represent a betrayal of public trust," she said into the cameras. "No one, regardless of office or position, is above the law." Back in Pine Bluff Estates, the fallout was immediate. Marlene called an emergency meeting not in the clubhouse this time, but in the community park under the pavilion. People brought lawn chairs and thermoses. The air was tense, but not angry, more like a community staring down the final act of a long, bitter chapter. "You all deserve to know the extent of what we've found," Marlene said, holding a printed report with both hands. Cheryl's actions were not isolated. She coordinated with individuals outside our association to manipulate property boundaries, redirect funds, and authorize demolitions under false pretenses. Victor Patel stood near the front. "How many properties were affected?" "5 in total," Marlene replied. 2 of them were cited for non-existent violations. One homeowner was pressured to sell under threat of escalating fines. And of course, Xander's cabin was destroyed entirely. I kept to the back, arms folded, watching as the community processed the scope of the damage. A man with a clipboard, Gregory, one of the newer board members, stepped up beside her. "We've also uncovered an unauthorized dues increase implemented last year. The money was funneled into a reserve account that Cheryl managed directly. That account was never disclosed in our financial statements." A woman in the crowd muttered. "She stole from all of us." Marlene didn't sugarcoat it. "She did, and we're cooperating fully with the district attorney to recover every cent." The HOA launched a restitution program. Homeowners who had been fined under fraudulent claims were reimbursed. Those who had been denied improvements were fast-tracked for approval. And the board voted unanimously to bring in an external auditor for an annual financial review going forward. Meanwhile, Lucien pushed the civil case forward. With Kellerman's involvement confirmed, we had a direct link between the forged documents and the demolition. That opened the door for additional damages under state racketeering laws. We amended the civil suit to include the county as a co-defendant, citing negligence in oversight. The county didn't fight it. They settled quietly, with a structured payout that covered not only the full reconstruction of the cabin, but also the cost of every legal filing, architectural redesign, hours lost to court appearances, and projected property devaluation due to the incident. By the time winter crept in, the new roof was sealed, the wood stove crackled again, and the porch had become my favorite place to sit and read. But the real ending didn't come until 2 months later, when I got the certified letter. On crisp white paper with the county seal embossed in gold, the letter outlined the official closure of the investigation. Cheryl Maddox had accepted a full plea deal. She would serve 18 months in state prison, pay restitution to the homeowners affected, including a court-mandated public apology published in the local paper, and was barred for life from holding any fiduciary or decision-making position related to residential associations or public boards. Kellerman wasn't as lucky. He went to trial. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict him. His sentence was 5 years for falsifying public records with an additional 2 years for conspiracy. He lost his pension, his license, and his reputation. The HOA changed permanently. Marlene and the new board rewrote the bylaws from scratch. They added clauses for transparency, public voting requirements for any enforcement policy, and an external review committee made up of residents, not board members. One evening in early spring, Marlene stopped by with a folder. "We're renaming the community park," she said. "Figured it was time to give it a name that reflects the new chapter." I raised an eyebrow. "What's the new name?" She opened the folder and handed me the printed resolution. "Tiller Ridge Park," it read. I blinked. You didn't have to, we did, she said. You stood up when no one else could, you didn't back down, and you held us accountable. I looked past her, toward the tall pines swaying against the evening sky. The cabin lights glowed behind us, and for the first time in over a year there was no tension in my chest, just quiet. I appreciate it, I said finally. But make sure the next guy who builds out here doesn't need a fight just to get treated fairly. Marlene smiled, not the polished kind Cheryl had perfected, but something real. We're working on that. She left the folder with me, and I watched her disappear down the gravel path toward her car. Later that night, I opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet and placed the resolution beside the original deed to the land signed by my grandfather, notarized in 1962. The cabin had stood once, fallen once, and now stood again. This time, it wasn't just a structure. It was a line in the sand, and no clipboard, no forged map, no power-hungry president was ever crossing it again.